Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, your host, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel. It's time for State of the Program, our weekly 30,000-foot view of the Texas Longhorn program and the upcoming games and what happened the previous week. We're sponsored by our friend Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm. All right, CJ and Gerry, big game, obviously, in Ann Arbor. It's a maze out, big-time atmosphere expected for the Longhorns. We hear it's the toughest ticket in decades in Ann Arbor outside of the Ohio State game, but it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in our lifetime, and anybody that's alive's lifetime. Texas has not gone to Michigan before at this time, so it's a first in many ways. But the Longhorns, for the second consecutive year, or actually third consecutive year, have a big non-conference game. Had played Alabama twice in 22 and 23, and then now Michigan in 24. What do y'all make of big non-conference games? Gerry, let's start with you there.
I think this one is really interesting to me because this is two schools that are kind of see themselves academically as much as they do athletically. And that's a little bit of a different thing. So there's the academic smack talk and the football smack talk, right? There's everything in this game. But look, as great as the atmosphere was at Alabama, I wasn't there. Bobby, everybody was there. You were there. Everybody talked about it. I think it's going up to another level this week at Michigan. That's really my thought. Look, they said they're going to have 111,000 people there. Derek Jeter is going to walk out with the honorary game football. You only call Derek Jeter up from Tampa on a really big game. I mean, so this is a really big game. And Michigan, a reminder, let's just go through Sark stats. 41-3 in the last 44, 16 wins in a row, 23 straight home wins.
You're talking about Michigan stats.
Michigan. Yeah, what Sark was talking about with Michigan. I mean, this is to your question, though, this is why I love all this in college football. These are games that should be played. Now with a 12-team playoff, we're headed to 16. These games shouldn't go away. But think about the buildup for this game. Fox, big noon kickoff, and game day. Game day's coming to Ann Arbor, and the game's on Fox. That's a really big game. That doesn't happen very often. That's a really big game. These are two of the top blue blood programs in our sport, and this is a massive, massive game. Not many times does a Texas and Michigan meet up in Michigan for the first time ever when Michigan's coming off a national championship too. The last time these two teams played was the Rose Bowl, one of the great Rose Bowls. Vince Young's performance was legendary before his second legendary performance. Just take all of this in and realize the magnitude of what's going to happen in Ann Arbor Saturday. It's big-time stuff.
Hey, CJ, the thing I want to ask you about this is, you're a little bit younger than Gerry and I. What do you think what is your feeling on this game, kind of from a different perspective than maybe Gerry and I have from this whole idea of it being two blue bloods, traditional national powers, teams that have rabid fan bases? You have anything different to say or add there?
Yeah, I mean, Gerry hit the nail on the head, right? Both schools think of themselves very highly in their own areas of the country. Right down south, Texas considers itself to be on par with one of the public Ivies, right? Michigan, very much the same with their educational status as well. Coming off the national championship, you could push that Michigan is in a better spot on the football field. We'll debate that, right? Of course, for this year. But, I mean, they are the national champions. That trophy is in Ann Arbor. Texas, of course, with the Director's Cup trophy. So you're talking about holistically the athletic departments up there with anybody in the country, right? I think that's the standard for both programs. I'm going to push back just a little bit. I don't think that this game will be larger in terms of emotion than what Texas walked into for Tuscaloosa. Of course, those kind of storylines of Sarkisian being under Saban, returning to Tuscaloosa, Quinn Ewers, getting hurt week one or in that first quarter against Tuscaloosa the week before, the safety, whatever, the game-winning kick. There a whole lot more kind of went into that build-up in my eyes than what Texas is walking into in Ann Arbor this year because of the turnover, right? We've talked about everybody that's left, the head coach, the defensive coordinator, the quarterback. Everybody that's left Michigan, it's a brand new football team. And quite frankly, I know they didn't show a whole lot week 1, but it didn't look like the team that was in the national championship a year ago. So it will be a great environment. Of course, there's no denying that. The Big House, one of the best spectacles in all of college football. Will it provide enough difficulty than playing in Tuscaloosa under the lights? I don't think so. But we'll see, of course.
Yeah, I think that my take on that is these are two different atmospheres. Like Texas went in, and this is the difference for me. Texas went in as an underdog to Alabama, right? Texas is favored going to Michigan. That adds an element of difference and expectations, not only from a fan standpoint, but even from a coaching and team standpoint. One of them was, we got to prove we belong. That was last year's team. This year is, we got to prove we're worth what we're rated right now, because Texas is actually rated higher, number 3 in the AP poll, over a Michigan team that's ranked number 10, even though they're the defending national champions.
The other thing with this game though, is it's different teams, but Texas was a play away from playing Michigan a national title last year. They had 3 shots at it, didn't get it done. And so there's a little something to this, more to this game too, because the other thing that's going to be interesting here is it's a contrast in styles for me. And I know we'll get into this. Michigan's going to try to physically whip Texas. Texas is going to try to say, okay, we're going to match our physicality. Now you cover our speed everywhere. It's a very, very interesting contrast in styles in this game. It's going to make for a great college football Saturday game.
All right. Before we go further, I want to say thank you to our sponsor. Each and every stay of the program brought to you by our friend Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm. For 20 plus years, Adam's been helping injured Texans with automobile accidents of any kind, car, truck, 18-wheeler, as well as even ATV issues. If you have been injured and think you might be due some compensation, make sure you give Adam and his group a call over at loweylawfirm.com. Thanks, Adam, for your help in sponsoring On Texas Football. All right, CJ, we were talking in our pre-prep for this show a little bit about how we don't think we don't think Texas is going to see the same Michigan team and the same Michigan offense that Michigan put out there against Fresno State. We think that Michigan, and you have some stats to back this up, and I want you to go through them. We think that Michigan was very vanilla on purpose. Explain what we mean by that, the stats that go with it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Michigan's MO has always been ground and pound, kind of own that time of possession. That's going to remain, right? They're going to try to establish that running game early. They're going to shorten the game and make sure that their drives extend. They tried that against Fresno State. The first half of that game, they weren't successful, right? They had 6 possessions. Only one of them extended over 3:15 in time. And that's just because they couldn't get consistency there. Now they put points on the board, more so because of turnovers by Fresno State that led to short fields. But it took until their 6th drive of the game to really get into about an 8-play drive where you saw that clock and that time, that possession stretched to about 7 minutes. Now, the big stat here is Michigan's about 130th, 132nd in the country, Bobby, in terms of time between snaps. So, for a team that likes to run the football, what does that do? That shortens the game. Fewer snaps, fewer opportunities for the Texas offense to get out onto the field and score points. The issue is, and this is where I think Texas can really start to get off on the right foot, is if Texas gets a lead early. Michigan doesn't like to throw the football. We saw that with Davis Warren week 1. He only had 5 attempts beyond 10 yards down the field. He only had 1 completion and went for exactly 10 yards. There's not a whole lot of separation with those wide receivers. We've talked about it. Colston Loveland, they completed 88% of his targets, 8 of 9, 87 yards and a score. When targeting anybody else, they were completing passes at 40%, and they were right underneath 2 yards per attempt. That's not good. They didn't have the separation down the field. And more importantly, Bobby, they didn't have anybody that could create after the catch, right? They had 0 missed tackles forced from their wide receivers or pass catchers in that game, whereas Texas had 11 in the season opener, which would have been their 2nd highest total in all of 2023. So the playmaking difference is on Texas' side quite favorably. Now, the issue again is, does Michigan show something completely different, right? They dropped back to pass 25 times. Only 3 of those included play action. That's going to change, and I think that's going to be increased tremendously against Texas.
So they had 3. Let me get this right, just from your numbers, okay? They had 25 pass attempts against Fresno, and only 3 of them were play action. Texas had more play action than that against Colorado State. I mean, and that is what will get some receivers open, especially if Texas has to commit an additional guy to the box to try to attempt to stop the Michigan run game. Play action is what J.J. McCarthy feasted off of last year as a Michigan Wolverine. So we will likely – they did not do that, to your point. They only did it 3 times against Fresno. They'll do that 7 to 10 times against Texas, is my guess.
Gerry? Well, here's the other piece to that, though. Is Davis Warren going to play as much at the quarterback position? Or are they going to go with Alex Orji more and have the QB run game? Are they going to – or did they kind of play a little cat and mouse in the opener? That's going to be interesting to see.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I get the distinct feeling that Davis Warren's the starter at quarterback from talking to Doug Karsh, the play-by-play guy at the University of Michigan. But you know, what happens if the play action pass doesn't work? Then do they go to plan B, and how effective can plan B be? And how effective, frankly, can Texas's defense adjust on the fly? Perhaps maybe the addition of Johnny Nansen and what he brought to the table at Texas will help them, because we know and have seen already a number of different looks from Texas, and in just its first game, much more multiple from Texas in week 1 than any point in time under Pete Kwiatkowski. So how do they marry that all together? How do they counterpunch and punch? All that sort of stuff. That's what the game's for on Saturday, and we'll see it. Hey, Gerry, I want to ask you, personnel-wise, I think it comes down to a big game of personnel. Michigan has some absolute studs. And this dude. And I talked about this. They had more like high-end studs than Alabama did a year ago. And Alabama probably had on that roster up and down 7 or 8 in first-round NFL guys from freshman to senior class. But Michigan has guys like Will Johnson, Kenneth Grant, Colston Loveland, Will Johnson. Those are 4 guys that have NFL first-round grades for this year, and they all have experience. How big a difference are those dudes in a game like this? Because that and do they, if they play like dudes, it's different than they just act like them. You know, I mean, so it's a little bit different, but I get the feeling that that's a big piece of this game.
Yeah. So what's crazy about those 4 names, obviously the 3 defensive names, Will Johnson, Mason Graham, and Kenneth Grant, I think Josiah Stewart maybe holds the cards for Michigan defensively Saturday, and Rayshawn Benny. They've got depth, but Josiah Stewart can wreck your passing game off the edge. And that, to me, is the guy that Texas really has to do a good – and he's going to shoot up draft boards. He may only be 6'1" and change. He wasn't highly recruited. He went to Coastal Carolina, had a great couple of years there, then transferred to Michigan. But, you know, look, watch him against Fresno State. As good as the other guys are, Will Johnson gave up 6 for 90 against the Fresno State receiver. The interior guys, really good players, but Josiah Stewart wrecked shop in that game. He's the guy that brought the consistent pressure. So I think it's huge. Look, nothing's changed for me. I think Jake Majors, I said this going into Bama last year, and I'm saying this going into Michigan, he has the #1 job on the whole Texas team this week. Communication on the offensive line has to be really strong. It's going to be loud. There's going to be 111,000 people there. Because Cam Williams, this is his first big – I mean, Kansas State, nothing against Kansas State. This is his first game he's ever started on the road in his first big game. And he's going to be lined up against NFL guys across from him. He didn't do that against Kansas State, and he didn't do that last week. This is a new world for Cam Williams after last week. These are high round draft picks that are about to line up across from him. Now, I think Texas practice gets him prepared for that now with Trey Moore and Colin Simmons, some of those guys you go against. But to me, it comes down to offensive line, pass protection, communication, because Michigan's strength is their entire front seven. And I know Will Johnson's a good player. Rod Moore tore his ACL in the spring. It's the front seven. It's handling the pass rush, because if Texas handles pass rush, they will have guys open in the passing game. Texas has too much speed, too many of those guys. The flip side is we talk about all the other guys, right? Most of Michigan's guys are on defense, and there's Colston Loveland. But it's going to come down to a kid like Khalil Mullings, who was recruited out of Roxbury, Mass. As a running back, played as a linebacker, played some linebacker. He's more of their number one running back if you look at last week. And he's a 6'2", 235-pound downhill guy. Texas is going to have to bring it against that guy. They're going to have to get him to the ground, because if he starts running downhill and falling forward on first downs, that's where this game changes for Texas.
Hey, CJ, Gerry mentioned briefly about Texas guys getting people in space on offense. You had a great stat that you mentioned a little bit earlier, but I want to expand on it. Texas receivers, according to you, now it could be receivers, be running backs, tight ends, or wide receivers, forced 11 missed tackles by Colorado State last week. By comparison, Michigan's receivers forced 0 missed tackles against Fresno State. Is that big advantage? Is it truly that big of advantage against this Michigan team? And it seems like, I mean, that's a huge deal. If Texas can make Michigan's guys miss, they don't really plan on that, but it seems like a major piece of the puzzle here for Texas going up to Michigan.
Yeah, of course, the big goal is to get the pass completed, right? And then it's what can you do after that? And I think that's where Texas has a tremendous advantage. Michigan's going to have a great front seven, but that secondary did not look like what it was a year ago. And I think in part of that, they didn't want to show a whole lot. They're saving some of their exotic looks for Texas and Steve Sarkisian this week. Bobby, Gerry, they still missed 9 tackles. Texas missed 3. And I know that Fresno State probably is a better overall team right now than Colorado State, especially in which we didn't see Colorado State throw the ball down the field really at all against Texas. Here's where I think Texas can really start to separate from Michigan. We've talked about that front seven. If the offensive line, who we expect to be in that Joe Moore Award conversation, right, they allowed a sack against Colorado State, but if they're able to give time to Quinn Ewers, and I'm talking protecting him from Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart and those 2 guys up front, it's a tall task. The Michigan backs secondary, they were tested 12 times beyond 10 yards down the field, Bobby. They allowed 8 completions. That's not a good mark at all. They allowed 131 yards. Both of those interceptions, by the way, that they were able to get off of Mikey Keene, one of them was right off the receiver's hands, bounced straight up into the lap of a wide receiver. The other one was Will Johnson making a heck of a play in which he was supposed to be blocked. There was a miscommunication, and he jumped the bubble route. So in my eyes, that secondary didn't do a whole lot that should put a whole lot of fear in Texas's eyes in terms of throwing the ball down the field. Of course, that's Ewers' MO. Talked about where he likes to get the ball that's within that 10 to 20-yard range. But it all starts with, getting that offensive line up front to give him time and let the playmakers after the catch be able to work. That's what Ohio State had really been able to, utilize to beat Michigan in the past. Obviously, that's changed the last few years, but that speed, the meshes, the crossing routes, the deep crossers, whatever they can do to create that speed separation. Texas has a lot of speed right now. I'm sure Sarkisian's finding ways to dial that up against Michigan in that secondary right now.
I want to add to what he said, because I think this is important. Off the Michigan team last year, Mike Sanistrill's in the NFL had 6 interceptions.
Baller. Rod
Moore, who tore his ACLs out this season, had 2 interceptions. Obviously, a defensive line, Chris Jenkins, had a tip ball interception. Keon Sapp, the other safety that transferred to Alabama, had 2 interceptions. And then they had another DB who graduated that had an interception at corner. They lost a lot of their playmakers on the ball in the secondary off that national title team. If Texas can pass pro, and the CJ's point, if Texas can get the ball out of Quinn's hands cleanly, Michigan may lack the playmakers in the secondary they had a year ago. And that in Texas, speed and playmaking ability after the catch may really be big.
All right, so we're going to go next to recruiting. But before we do, I want to circle back to something that CJ said very early, and that is turnovers leading to short fields. That is the one absolute thing that Texas cannot do. They cannot give Michigan cheap points. Just can't do it. If they do, it's not going to look good, because you cannot give a offense like Michigan's free opportunities. They don't need they're not a great offense, probably, based on what we've seen thus far. So you don't need to give them any freebies. Make them earn every single thing. That means no fumbles, no interceptions in minus territory coming out of your own end zone or what have you. No big punt returns too. I mean,
especially against the team that wants to condense the game, Bobby. Especially against the team that wants to condense the game. It's not in a shootout where everybody's going to have a lot of possessions. If you turn it over, you're losing 2 possessions because Michigan's condensing the game.
Yeah. All right. We need to get the recruiting here a little bit. Gerry, I'm going to start with you on this. Big picture, Texas, 19 commitments. Jamie French, Nick Brooks last week, Jonah Williams the week before. They're on a little bit of a roll. And then it looked like a speed bump got hit. Elijah Bo Barnes goes to visit Oregon. Yet it sounds like, based on what you've heard from Elijah's camp, he's firm now to the University of Texas again. And you're now down in Georgia because Texas has offered 4 defensive linemen in the state, all of whom might visit Texas at some point. And that is one of the pieces. What are you hearing on the recruiting front? I mean, you mentioned in Coffee and Football this morning that Texas is even in some minor contact still with Kelshawn Johnson, the wide receiver committed to A&M out of Hitchcock. What's going on the recruiting front? CJ, I'm going to ask you specifically about Michael Terry when it's your turn.
Yeah, so I think here's the big thing is defensive line, defensive back recruiting is kind of where all the Texas fans are pointing to right now. And defensive line recruiting obviously is number one because you have Josiah Sharma committed, didn't bring in that many guys for official visits. And we were kind of like, hold off coming to conclusions because Kenny Baker got in late from the NFL. He didn't get a chance to go eval all these guys in person in the spring in last year because he was in the NFL. So you got to let him get his feet on the ground. And even this spring when he was out, he didn't get a chance to go see all the guys that they've offered now, but he got a chance to see more guys. And so I really like where Texas is at in terms of their evaluation on defensive line. I saw Joseph Mbakchu yesterday at Grayson. I'm here to tell you, I don't care where he's ranked. That's too low. I mean, this is his first year playing football. He's been given it a go 6 months here, and his future is really bright. The guy's been offered by Texas, Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, South Carolina, and USC since the first game of the season. That turned into a national recruitment in a hurry. Walter Mathis out of Savannah, Calvary Day, one of the top D-line prospects in the country. He's not ranked like it, but there's so many guys in Georgia. Some guys aren't going to be ranked high because of the industry not wanting to rank as many guys from one state that high in one position. But I'm here to tell you, visited Clemson, Miami, LSU, and Auburn. And Texas has talked to him multiple times. Texas is on the right guys on the defensive line. The key there is they've cast a wider net. Now you're going to start to see some of these guys make visits to Texas, and you're giving yourself more shots on goal with quality D-line prospects. And that's not even counting Myron Charles committed to FSU. Kevin Wynn from Georgia committed to FSU. They're staying on those guys. They have light conversations with Brandon Brown still, right? And they're not backing off of their 1A guys. But what they're doing is they're expanding their ones list right now. And I really like that because the state of Georgia is loaded. I don't think Texas is done offering defensive linemen in this cycle in the Southeast region. I think 2 or 3 more could happen. So I think they're on the right track. But the key is giving yourselves enough shots on goal here to come December 4th, you sign 3 or 4 really good prospects. And I think that's where Texas is headed right now with the understanding from the Texas fan base. These are all really tough Southeast SEC recruiting battles, national recruiting battles. So you got to cast a wide net to hit on these guys. It's not easy when Georgia in Tennessee and Alabama and FSU. I know they're struggling. Florida is going to have a new coach in place at some point. Clemson is Dabo's still right there close to the Atlanta area. I mean, Auburn is on the up now. I mean, there's a lot of competition for these guys. Ohio State recruits a defensive lineman in Georgia and Florida. So these are real recruitments. I think the other one, Kelshawn Johnson's interesting to me. I spoke with Kelshawn this morning, and he's talking about coming to a Texas game. Again, Sark doesn't back off these guys. And with Jamie French and Khalil Lockett committed, what does Texas need? They got tremendous X receivers and a guy in French who can move around. They need the speed, quick, darting slot receiver type in this class to go with the two bigger X outside receivers. And they're still in contact with Kelshawn Johnson. They're still in contact with others, but Kelshawn's talking about coming to a Texas game this year. So Texas is staying on those guys. Defensive back, I think it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But look, Texas has 19 commits. They're ranked the 6th or 7th class in the country. And I'm here to tell you, if they beat Michigan Saturday, they're off and running. I mean, this is going to be a 4th straight top 5 class and a class that could end up in the top 3. I mean, it's a big game Saturday because the recruiting momentum after that, if Texas wins at Michigan, was coupled with an A&M losing to Notre Dame, and LSU losing to USC. Oklahoma, we'll see how many losses they take, but they're going to lose games this year. Things are lined up for Sark if he can get this win Saturday and really set this thing off. And this is why Sark is patient in recruiting, guys. This is why he didn't panic. He told CJ at the Texas Coaches Convention, let's talk about this come December, right?
Hey, I gotta say this. All this is good stuff, Gerry, and fingers crossed about the victory and all that stuff. Also mentioned Javion Hilson out of Cocoa, Florida, a possibility. He's committed to Florida State. Florida and Florida State look like they're imploding right now. They look like they could be cherry-picked a little bit. Hey, CJ, Michael Terry, young man out of Alamo Heights in San Antonio. We expect him up at the Nebraska-Colorado game this weekend. Is Nebraska one of those teams that Texas has to be concerned with?
Yeah, real quick, Bobby, I think imploding and putting it lightly for Florida State. But for Michael Terry, right, I was down there in San Antonio about 2 weeks ago to talk to him. It was Oregon, Nebraska, and Texas, right? Those were the final 3. I think the distance for Oregon's going to be a bit too far. They've kind of offered him all sorts of different avenues onto the field at different positions. Nebraska, very much the same. Running back is on the table at Nebraska. And, he obviously wants to be a wide receiver. He wants to be a skill player more than anything. For them to be pitching all of that, and what's interesting there is we've talked about Sarkisian and how he'll use Michael Terry in his offense. Well, it's Matt Rule who's been one of the more focal points of that recruitment. And it certainly helps when it's the head coach, right? He talks about Oregon. Well, that's Coach Stein, right? The offensive coordinator. It's a little different when it's the head man involved there. And right now, Matt Rule's done a tremendous job. I look at Nebraska as the biggest competition for Texas in this race right now. Of course, Oregon's not going to go quietly. We've seen that all cycle long. They like to circle back, make a big last-ditch effort, if you will, to get a kid in their class. But Nebraska, I think, provides a little bit more of a homely feel for him, as well as that connection with the head coach that means something to him, who has a lot of ties to the Central Texas region. So if he does make it up to Nebraska right now, I think that is the expectation for him to go see the Cornhuskers play Colorado. That'll be a big game in its own right, this weekend as well in Lincoln. So it'll be interesting. I asked him last week, do you plan on coming down to Texas for the season opener? He said, nope, not this week. All right. Well, that does tell me that at some point this year he will be back in Austin for a game. I would expect it sometime before the Oklahoma State game. Of course, as we hit the first week of September now.
You mean the Oklahoma game at the State Fair? Oh, okay.
Yes, I expect him on campus before then. Texas will have 3 opportunities, obviously, with UTSA, ULM, and Mississippi State. We've hit the first week of September. I think that we'll start to see him inch closer and closer to a mid-September to a late September decision, which was the vibe that I got leaving Alamo Heights 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Hey, Gerry, anything to add? I want to say this about Kelshawn Johnson. Talking about Florida and Florida State imploding. I don't know what you would call what A&M put on the field offensively. If he watched that game, that had to be a little bit of a wake-up call about what he's looking at from that perspective. But, it's a long season. Texas could go up and not do well up in Michigan.
Exactly.
And things could turn on its head. So we don't want to be pointing fingers too quickly. Hopefully, though, Texas takes care of business and or at least has a good showing up in Ann Arbor. Anything else you want to add, Gerry or CJ, before we let folks go on this state of the program?
No, since this is state of the program, obviously the big football game, basketball. Texas had a 5-star basketball visitor, Isaiah Harwell, on campus last weekend. They have another big one this weekend, one of the top point guards in the country, Kingston Fleming. So we're talking football. We're in the football season. Obviously, it's huge, but there's some major recruits in other sports setting foot on campus, especially around Texas football home games. So a lot of big recruiting stuff going on at the University of Texas right now.
All right, you guys can check it out on ontexasfootball.com. We have all your news and notes over there. Also, thank you to our community here on YouTube as well as on the podcast. Feel free to drop us a question, anything you need at any point in time. Again, visit us also at ontexasfootball.com. Become an OTF OG. Use the promo code OTF OG and you get $20 off an annual subscription, just $39.95 a year for all the news and notes from CJ, Gerry, myself, as well as a group of others that cover the Longhorns on a daily basis. CJ, Gerry, thank you all so much. CJ, I will see you, young man, up in Ann Arbor this weekend. It's going to be fun, man. Y'all have a good one, guys. Hook 'em.